Okay. One guy calls,
One
and the river is, I mean, it hits both of our draws, but there is a four straight on the board now.
right.
But I
This
have to feel confident that I've got the best hand.
right,
He checks, and the question is about bet size now.
right. I think by now the thing is, as you say, it hits both of our jaws, but I'm not sure I agree because all his jaws already hit. Um, if he hit a big draw, if he hit his jaw, all his jaws already hit uh,
On the
on the
turn.
turn. So either he had the 3-4 or he had like the 8-9, the inside, or if he didn't have any of those, the other draws, he had like the 7-8s and stuff, he won't be able to call a small bet anyway. So basically he either has like, and I think he would have check raised you with most of those sort of turns,
Yeah,
where he hit big. So we can sort of assume for one thing that he doesn't have a straight for sure. We can assume that he doesn't have a flush. We can take that as a given. We can assume that if he doesn't have a straight, he doesn't have a flush, he doesn't have a set either because you're going to get check raised either on that flop or on the turn 100% of the time. So he doesn't have much, right?
right.
Um, so what are we thinking as we're thinking he has an ace? And now, again, this is going to be sort of very dependent on your opponent. Some opponents here, because you know that this guy doesn't have anything, if he has the 7-8, that's not going to make a difference anyway. So what you need to gauge is with an ace, that's the only hand you're interested in is his ace. Because 7-8, you're not going to get any value from no way, no how. So just forget about those type of hands. And, his two pairs he would have raised by the turn anyway. But if he has sort of a weak ace, like an ace 8, ace 9, something like that, ace deuce, what is the perfect bet sizing here? And this is going to be very opponent dependent because some opponents here, because he's not going to be thinking about the flush either, he's going to be more thinking about the four. So when you shove here, he's going to kind of think that, well, I mean, he either has it or he doesn't, or he's turning his queens or jacks or whatever or eights into a bluff.
Right.
Um, uh, or it's going to be the type of guy where you want to bet like a very small, like, I don't know, 290 or 3 so that he can't help himself but call. Do you understand? There's like two different types of opponents here. There's an opponent that's going to think that when you shove this flop, you're actually merging your range, and he's going to think, well, Pablo either has, the stone cold nuts or he has absolutely nothing. He's either got the straight or he has nothing.
Yeah.
And there's another type of opponent that's gonna sort of, put you on exactly that hand, and he'll want to call a smaller bet instead. So when we get to the river, as with most river decisions, this is the thing. Most river flop decisions, turn decisions, they can be more generic. But once you get, and pre-flop can be even more generic. But once you get to the river, the further along the hand you get, the more opponent specific each street kind of becomes, especially when it comes to bet sizing. So by the time we're getting to this river, it's really tough for anybody but yourself to gauge the correct sort of bet sizing amount. But when it comes to hand reading, we know that this guy does not have much by now. There's only one possible strong hand he could have, which is the 4-5, but I think he
Right.
shoves that.
Um, so
But that's a really small part of his range to call with pre-flop.
okay.
So
So
I mean, all indications point to some kind of ace type hand.
that's yeah, I mean that's kind of what I put him on. I can already see that um my reasoning of ranges still has obviously still has a lot to be desired. Um, at this point, I put him on some kind of an ace and decided to that shoving would make my hand look kind of like you said, like I'm merging my range and hoping
Right.
for kind of a hero call. But I think out of his overall range, I kind of prefer a smaller bet.
Right. And I think so too, especially when you look at your own line. So I mean, what have you been doing then
Oh, I mean,
this is the thing. So what have you been doing when you've been sort of raising, betting, shoving? Um, you know, f-
I look
to me,
insanely strong.
you look insanely strong. I mean, from his point of view. So I mean, the only possible hand that he can beat here, as I said, is if he sort of in his mind incorrectly gauges. that you are turning some kind of pair into a bluff. But the thing is, that's also quite far-fetched because in order for you to have done that, you must have actually wanted to bet your kings or queens on this flop, which most people check. Then
Right.
you must have wanted to double barrel it when the seven hit. And then you must have wanted to turn it into a bluff by the river. So, I mean, yes, people will make these hero calls because people like to delude themselves and people like calling. But there's a lot of things that have to match for your kings or queens or jacks or whatever's to be turned into a bluff here. And again, most people do check these hands behind by the river and hope the other guy has some kind of like 6-8 or, pair of tens because obviously people don't hand read that well. But, I mean, there's a lot of things that have to match for you to have any of those hands that he can beat. So it actually looks really strong. Now, a little bit of a tricky line here that you can take. I don't know how well this works in the micros, but it can work sort of higher up in the stakes. Is that you bet a large amount, but it looks as if though you're betting a large amount, but you want to save some money in case you're wrong. So there's 690 in the pot, which with your strong hand actually makes it sort of a perfect bet for your $7 there. But if you bet something like 610 or 590, because I mean it's completely viable for you to shove a strong hand. But if you bet something like 590 or six, potentially it could look like you're bluffing. But just in case you're wrong, you want to save a buck or two. Do
Huh.
you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I do
It's a bit of a
understand what you
tricky
mean.
line, but like, for instance, I'll play with somebody and, I'll have like $782 left behind on the river, and that's going to be like less, maybe even less than a pot size bet, and I'll raise it to 711. Do you understand what I mean? And I'll
Yeah.
get called with like second pair because, he's thinking, okay, you know, in the long run, this guy wants to save $70 on this hand or on this situation. So he's not actually shoving you know, so he's actually not wanting to shove with his bluff. It's kind of sort of a very, very tricky sort of leveling type game there. But, I
Yeah, I've
guess,
never thought about that. That's really interesting.
yeah, as you guys move up through the stakes, and the thing is this, moving up through the stakes isn't, it sounds different today than it did, a couple of years back because today you got people at all stakes who are actually quite thinking, quite capable, quite confident. So a lot of those sort of plays that a couple of years ago might have just worked in the mid stakes, will today work in the small stakes as well as in the micros because pretty much everybody here seems to be like a thinking player. People are sort of thinking through ranges, they're doing equity, they're thinking through your bet sizing. So that kind of sort of tricky bet sizing might work. But personally, you know, as a standard for myself in this spot, I would have bet like 270
Okay.
and
Yeah,
OP calls.
I kind of like that because I'm just giving him such good odds when I do that.
Yeah,
And I mean, that could be perceived as a bluff too, just like a kind of a cheap bluff.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very hard for you to have a bluff in this situation.
Right.
It's pretty much impossible. But we can hope against hope that he'll look at the pot, look at your bet, and say, okay, 4-1. I don't have to be right too often. That's what we're hoping for.
Right. So, given this whole hand, which street do you think was misplayed the most?
I think it all started with your. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, I think it's the infamous A. Jones that once said that pre-flop compounds post-flop, or was it the
Right.
other way around? But I mean, this is the thing. If you avoid that C bet on the flop, which was your first mistake, um, you might be able to avoid further mistakes throughout the hand. You might even get check to on the turn in case they don't actually. If they do have the cards that you put them on, the king, queen, queen, jack type hands, both of them, you might even actually get check to on the turn, and you might be able to pick up the pot with a continuation bet there. So I think probably the biggest mistake is on the flop where you had absolutely no equity and you had a board which should potentially hit one of these guys pretty well.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Pavel.
All right. Bye.
Bye.